Everyone saw the medals, the stage, the interviews, the thunderous applause echoing through the stadium like a storm of pride. But no one saw the wooden splinters stuck in their palms at 8 years old. No one saw the way they slept on sawdust, sharing a single blanket during winter. No one knew their first stage wasn't built of light, but of plywood scraps and oil stains in a dusty workshop behind a forgotten street. And certainly, no one remembered the man who made a promise in that workshop, a promise that would take 23 years to keep. But when he returned, the world would finally understand what it means to believe in someone when they have nothing. The workshop wasn't much, just a one-room shack on the edge of town, walls patched with old tin sheets, the scent of cedar and sweat clinging to every surface. The sign above the door had long faded, but everyone still called it Mr. Dale's shed, even though Mr. Dale had passed 5 years earlier. Inside, the air buzzed with the rhythm of wood being shaped, not by machines, but by hands. And among those hands were two sets smaller than the rest, moving with a precision that didn't belong to children. Eli and Ezra, twins, barely 10 years old, but already with fingers calloused from sanding planks and balancing nails on worn-down thumbs. They didn't talk much. They didn't play. They worked beside their father, a carpenter with a bad back and a kind heart. Their mother had died during childbirth. Their father had raised them alone, teaching them not only how to build furniture, but how to stand up straight in a world that constantly asked them to kneel. And then he was gone, a heart attack, sudden and cruel. One moment, he was drawing a pattern for a rocking chair. The next, he was on the floor, clutching his chest, his eyes pleading for time he no longer had. The town mourned, but only for a day. The workshop was closed. The boys stayed. They had no one else, no aunts, no uncles, just the dust, the wood, and each other. That's when Isaac Ward entered their lives. He wasn't from around there. A traveling apprentice, barely in his 20s, was passing through to learn the old techniques from local carpenters. He had worked alongside their father for 3 months and slept in the loft above the workshop. He could have left. No one would have blamed him. He had no ties to the town, and even less to the boys. But that night, after the funeral, as the twins sat silently on the steps of the workshop, their cheeks stained with dry tears and their shirts still smelling of sawdust, he sat between them. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on each of their backs. "I can't be your father," he whispered, voice cracking, "but I'll never forget you. I promise. Someday, when I have something to offer, I'll come back." Eli looked up, eyes hardened far too early. "People say that. They leave." Isaac nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Then let me be the one who proves them wrong." He stayed 1 more week, taught them how to repair a warped cabinet door, how to check grain direction by touch, and how to polish without leaving streaks. Then he was gone. The twins watched his silhouette disappear down the gravel path, shoulders heavy with the kind of goodbye that kids shouldn't have to learn. They never spoke of that night again. But 23 years later, the sound of a camera shutter would capture their faces on national television, and the promise that had once been whispered over sawdust would roar back into the world like thunder. The town forgot about the twins. That's what small towns do. They move on, birthdays come, storefronts change owners, and the people who once whispered, "Poor boys," begin saying, "They're quiet ones, aren't they?" And eventually, they stop saying anything at all. But Eli and Ezra never forgot, not the creak of the workshop floor, not the smell of their father's pipe, not even the exact pitch of Isaac's voice when he said he'd come back. They folded that promise into their bones like nails into soft pine. Not to be looked at every day, but to hold them together when the world tried to pull them apart. At 13, they rebuilt the broken hinges on the front door. At 15, they began fixing neighbors' chairs in exchange for bread or used textbooks. By 17, they were crafting tables better than anything in the county market. And yet, they remained invisible. Ezra had a mind for design. He would sketch blueprints with astonishing accuracy, sometimes from memory alone. Eli had the hands, his instincts with grain, texture, and durability were beyond training. Together, they were not just builders, they were artists hiding in plain sight. But no one called it art. They called it boys doing chores. Only they called it scrappy furniture from the orphans. No matter how precise, how elegant, how original, it was still just wood from those kids in Mr. Dale's old place. One winter, a traveling auction house came through town. They set up downtown, showcasing antique replicas. The twins walked the perimeter of the tent, wide-eyed. They recognized every joint, every dovetail, every lazy corner someone had hidden under lacquer. It wasn't snobbery, it was heartbreak. They knew they could do better, but no one had ever permitted them to be more than a dusty pair of hands. That night, Ezra said something he'd never dared say before. Maybe he forgot. Eli, Isaac. Eli was silent for a long time. Then he said, maybe he didn't. Maybe he's building something, too. By 20, they had saved enough to buy their saw, a used one, half rusted, but it was theirs. At 22, they created a dining table so intricate, so structurally sound, that it withstood a tornado that leveled 3 homes around it. Still, no one called it genius. Still, no one knocked on their door with an opportunity. And so they kept working, kept hoping, until the day a black SUV pulled up in front of the workshop, one they'd never seen before. The engine still warm. The driver stepped out, wearing boots polished like city glass and a jacket that didn't belong in this county. He looked around, eyes scanning the shed as if he already knew its every corner. Ezra's hand froze mid-sanding. Eli squinted through the light, and the man, now older, tired around the eyes but stronger somehow, stepped forward. 23 years, he said. You've been waiting long enough. It was Isaac, and this time, he didn't come with a promise. He came with a plan. Isaac stood in the doorway of the workshop, the wind tugging at his coat as though the world itself was urging him to speak. The twins stood in silence, their hands still holding the tools they had grown up with, the tools that had defined their lives. But there was something about Isaac's presence, something different in the air, that made the dust in the workshop seem to settle, as if even the room was holding its breath. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile that said he knew something the twins didn't, something they weren't ready to hear. I've spent the last 2 decades building something, Isaac said, his voice steady but soft. And I think it's time I finish what I started, with you. The twins exchanged a glance, an unspoken question passing between them. Was this some kind of joke? After all these years, after all the silence, the broken promises, and the space between them, was he standing here offering them something? Isaac took a step forward. His eyes met theirs, and for the first time in years, he looked them in the eyes as equals, not as children or apprentices. I've learned a lot, he said quietly, but the one thing I've never forgotten is the promise I made. The silence in the room grew heavier, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused. The twins weren't sure whether to smile, cry, or scream. All they had ever wanted was someone to see them as more than the children left behind. But now that Isaac had returned, it felt as though the world was asking them to make a choice they weren't ready for. We've built something, too, Eli said, his voice firm, though there was a hint of uncertainty behind it. But we've never asked for anything in return. We've done it on our own. Isaac nodded. I know, and I've watched every step, every design, every piece of furniture that's ever come out of this workshop. It's not just work, it's art, it's a legacy. Ezra swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had always been the dreamer, the one who believed in the possibilities even when no one else did. But there was a part of him that was afraid that Isaac was offering something that would change everything, that would take them out of the shadows and force them into the light. What if they weren't ready? What are you asking for? Isaac, Ezra finally spoke, his voice shaky but determined. Isaac looked at them both, his eyes now filled with a quiet intensity. I'm asking for the chance to give you what I promised, a chance to build something together, not just a workshop, not just a business, but a name, a brand, a legacy that will live on long after we're gone. I've secured an investment. I have the connections. All I need is you to take the next step. The twins stood there, absorbing his words. For years, they had lived in the shadows of a promise, waiting for someone to offer them a chance. And now, Isaac was offering them more than just a business deal. He was offering them a future they never dared to dream of. But with that future came responsibility. The kind of responsibility that could make or break them. Eli looked down at his hands, still stained with the marks of years spent shaping wood. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all that Isaac was asking, but he couldn't deny the truth in Isaac's words. They had been building something from the ground up, but they had never had the chance to make it truly their own. Until now. I'll do it, Eli said, his voice steady. Ezra nodded, his eyes filled with both excitement and fear. I'm in. Isaac smiled. This time, it was the smile of someone who had waited a long time to see this moment. The promise had been kept, and now, together, they would build something that would change the world. The transition from a dusty workshop to a polished showroom was a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. Eli and Ezra had always been good with their hands, but now they were asked to do something they had never done before, create a vision, not just a product. Isaac had promised them more than just financial backing. He promised them the tools to make their dreams tangible, designers, marketing teams, and access to high-profile investors. It was overwhelming. The twins had never known anything other than the smell of sawdust and the rhythm of carving wood. But now, they were surrounded by glossy brochures, shiny prototypes, and rooms filled with people who spoke a language they didn't quite understand. They learned quickly, though. In the first few months, their creations were displayed in upscale showrooms, their names whispered among the city's elite. The first major break came when an interior designer from New York ordered a custom set of dining tables for a luxury hotel. The twins had always believed in the beauty of simplicity, and it was this very simplicity that struck the designer's eye. They hadn't needed to use exotic woods or gold inlays. The wood spoke for itself. The twins realized something during those early days. They weren't just crafting furniture, they were crafting stories. Each table told a story of resilience. Each chair held the weight of their father's lessons and Isaac's promise. The pieces they made weren't just functional, they were heirlooms in the making. Isaac had a knack for pushing them beyond their limits. Think bigger, he'd say, his voice always calm, but with an undeniable urgency. He could see things they couldn't yet imagine. Grand projects, collaborations with global brands, and partnerships with artists who were just as passionate about design as they were about their craft. As the months passed, the once tiny workshop became a hub of innovation. The twins were no longer just working with wood, they were working with their legacy, and they could feel the weight of it. It was a heavy feeling, but also one that propelled them forward. They weren't the boys who had been abandoned in a small town anymore. They were the architects of their future. One day, while walking through a high-end gallery in Manhattan, a familiar face appeared. It was a magazine editor from a leading design publication. She had visited the workshop when they were just getting started. Before the name Ward and Sons had become synonymous with excellence, now she was holding a piece of their work in her hands, a hand-carved walnut table with intricate inlays of silver leaf. "This is it," she said, her voice full of awe. "This is what the world's been waiting for. I want to feature you, your work, your story. The world needs to know who you are." That night, when Eli and Ezra returned to their sleek office, Isaac was waiting for them. His eyes sparkled as they relayed the news, but it wasn't just about the magazine feature. It was about the validation, the recognition that came from someone who had seen hundreds of talented artisans but had never seen anything quite like the twins. "You've done it," Isaac said. This is only the beginning. They sat there, in the glow of the city lights outside their window, knowing that the promise Isaac had made so many years ago was no longer a quiet whisper in the workshop. It had grown into something undeniable. The twins were no longer just craftsmen. They were pioneers in the world of design, and their names were finally being spoken with the reverence they deserved. The stage lights were blinding. They were hot, almost too much for Eli, who had always preferred the shadows of the workshop to the glare of the spotlight. Ezra, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in it, his posture straight, his smile unwavering. But today, they both stood there, side by side, feeling the weight of their past more than ever. They had spent their entire lives crafting beauty with their hands, but now they were about to create something far greater. A moment, a symbol. The gala event was one of the most prestigious in the design world. Top architects, fashion moguls, and billionaires had gathered under one roof. They weren't just here to look at art. They were here to celebrate the next big thing in design, and that next big thing was Ward & Sons. Isaac had arranged for them to be honored with an award for Innovative Designers of the Year. But it wasn't the recognition they were after. It was what came with it, a full-circle moment. From the workshop where they used to make furniture in the dark to standing in front of the industry's giants. They had finally arrived. This was the proof, the culmination of everything they had worked for. And as the award was handed to them, with a round of applause echoing in the grand hall, they both felt the familiar tug at their hearts, the tug that came from the memory of their father's hands, of Isaac's promise. It was a fleeting thought, but it hit them like a wave. Their father, who had never seen this moment, who had never known they would become more than just the boys who grew up with scraps of wood, and Isaac, who had walked into their lives with a simple promise and had stayed long enough to make it real. As they stepped forward to the microphone, the weight of the room pressed down on them. They weren't just accepting an award, they were accepting a part of their lives they had never shared with anyone. Until now. Eli's voice cracked as he began to speak. He started, but the words caught in his throat. It was the first time in their lives, the first time in public, that he allowed himself to feel the full weight of their journey. He hadn't expected it, but the emotions rushed in, the years of working in silence, the years of feeling like they were invisible. Suddenly, they were too much. Ezra stepped in, his hand gently resting on Eli's shoulder. He knew his brother wasn't one to show vulnerability. He knew that Eli had always been the strong one, the quiet anchor. But now, the moment had come, and they had to embrace it. He cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the emotions rising inside. This means more than we could ever put into words. Our father taught us everything we know about craftsmanship. But it's Isaac who showed us what it means to believe in something beyond ourselves. And to everyone who's ever believed in us, we're here because of you. Ezra's voice trailed off as he glanced at Eli, who was looking down. His face flushed. The tears were there. He could see them now, fighting to be released. But Eli didn't cry in public. He didn't. Yet today, something had broken. Maybe it was the recognition, the years of struggle, or just the feeling that, after all this time, they were finally seen for who they truly were. The applause continued, but all Eli could hear was the whisper of Isaac's promise in the back of his mind, the promise that had led them here, to this stage, the promise that had been more than just words. It had been the foundation of everything they had built, and for the first time in their lives, Eli realized that the weight of it was not a burden, but a gift. He turned to Ezra, his eyes wet with emotion, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to feel everything. They were no longer invisible. They were no longer just the boys in the workshop. They were Ward & Sons. They were the legacy they had built together, and no one could ever take that away. The evening had ended. The gala was over, and the golden lights of the award ceremony had dimmed. The twins, now fully immersed in their new reality, stood silently in the back room, still processing the overwhelming emotions of the night. For so long, they had worked in the shadows, never imagining they would stand under the spotlight. recognized for their work. But as they walked off the stage, award in hand, it wasn't the applause or the validation that lingered with them. It was the quiet, steadfast presence of Isaac. He wasn't at the gala. Not this time. He had stayed back, watching from a distance as the twins basked in their well-deserved recognition. It wasn't because he didn't want to celebrate with them. It was because he had always believed they would do this on their own, without needing his presence to remind them of their worth. He had been their mentor, their guide, and their reminder that anything was possible if they believed in the promise they had made all those years ago. But Isaac wasn't one for the spotlight. His role in their lives was more than just being their financial backer or a catalyst for their success. He had given them the belief that they could overcome their struggles, and now it was time for them to take that belief and shape it into something even greater. Later that evening, after the rush of the awards and the interviews had calmed, the twins found themselves standing alone in the quiet of their office. The office that had once been a place of dreams, now a place where those dreams were finally being realized. And there, standing at the door, was Isaac. No words were exchanged at first, just a quiet nod from him and a knowing look from them. He stepped forward, placing his hand on both their shoulders. "You did it," he said simply. Ezra, still holding the award, turned to face him. "We couldn't have done it without you." Isaac smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was a smile of contentment, knowing that they had found their way. "You were always capable. I just gave you a nudge when you needed it. The rest, you built that yourselves." They stood there for a moment, the weight of those words sinking in. It wasn't the awards that defined them. It wasn't the recognition. It was the journey, the challenges, the years spent perfecting their craft, honing their skills, and finally, stepping into the world as equals. Isaac had given them more than just an opportunity. He had given them the belief in themselves, and now it was their turn to pay it forward. As the trio stood in the soft light of the office, the city lights twinkling outside the window, they knew that the future held even more for them, more challenges, more triumphs, and more opportunities to share their story. But for now, they were content, because the legacy they had built wasn't just about the furniture they created or the brand they had established. It was about the promise they had kept, the promise that had started in a small, dusty workshop all those years ago and had led them to this moment of triumph. Isaac had promised, and now they had delivered. As the lights dimmed and the echoes of the applause slowly faded away, Eli and Ezra stood side by side, their hearts full of pride. They had journeyed from the dust of a small, forgotten workshop to the bright lights of the design world's most prestigious stage. Their story, shaped by their father's lessons, Isaac's promise, and years of perseverance, had become one of resilience, passion, and legacy. This moment was just the beginning. The world now knew their name, but to them, the real reward was knowing that no matter where life took them, they would always return to their roots, the workshop that first shaped their dreams. And as they walked off that stage, hand in hand, they didn't need the applause anymore. They had finally built what they had always wanted, not just a name, but a place where their story would live on forever.